3,000 people came to the municipal auditorium that night to sit on their hands. And Delia Boyd, 17 years old and working the third usher post on the left aisle, watched every one of them file in with their arms already crossed. By the time it was over, those same 3,000 people were standing, and grown men who had signed a petition to keep Louis Armstrong out of their city were wiping their faces with their sleeves. And Delia would spend the next 60 years trying to explain to people what it felt like to watch a room change its mind all at once. It was a Thursday, March 1957, Chattanooga, Tennessee. The clock over the box office read 7:52 when the doors finally opened, and it was cold in the hall, colder than March had any right to be. Rewind 3 weeks, and you would understand why the room was cold before anyone even sat down. The trouble started with the newspaper. A columnist for the local paper had run 3 pieces in a row about the concert, and none of them were about music. Louis Armstrong traveled with a band, the columnist reminded everyone, and that band did not look the way this city expected a band to look. There were white men in it, and colored men in it, and they rode the same bus and stood on the same stage, and to a certain kind of reader in Chattanooga in the spring of 1957, that was the whole story. By the second week, there was a petition. Delia had seen it herself, folded in the pocket of Mr. Harlan Pryor, who owned the hardware store 2 doors down from where she lived with her aunt. Mr. Pryor was 49, heavy-shouldered, a deacon and a man people listened to. He had gotten better than 400 signatures asking the city to cancel the show. The city did not cancel the show. The contract had been signed. But the manager of the auditorium, a nervous man named Ferris, called the ushers together on the afternoon of the concert and told them exactly how the evening was expected to go. "It's going to be a quiet crowd," he said. "Maybe an unfriendly one. You keep the aisles clear, and if anybody starts anything, you come find me. Don't try to be a hero." Then he looked at Delia, because she was the youngest, and because her hands were shaking. "You'll be fine," he said. He did not sound like he believed it. Delia had a reason to be there beyond the 40 cents an hour. Her grandmother, who had raised her until she passed 2 winters back, had owned exactly 1 phonograph record in her whole life, and it was a scratched Louis Armstrong side she used to play on Sunday afternoons with the windows open. "Listen to that man laugh through a horn," her grandmother used to say. "Nobody taught him to do that. That's just how the good Lord made him." So Delia was not neutral, but she also knew what a room full of Mr. Pryors could do, and she was frightened of it. The band came out at 8:15. There was a scatter of applause, thin and short, the kind that dies before it fills the room. Then Louis Armstrong walked into the light, smaller than Delia had pictured, 56 years old that spring, the white handkerchief already in his left hand. And there was almost nothing. A few claps up in the balcony, down on the floor where the money seats were, where Mr. Pryor sat in the 4th row with his arms folded across his chest. Nobody moved at all. Delia felt her stomach drop. She had heard of a cold room. She had never stood inside one. Armstrong seemed not to notice. He tipped his head to the balcony, said, good evening," in that gravel voice, and lifted the trumpet. The first number was fast and bright, a New Orleans thing, and it landed on the floor seats like rain on a tin roof, heard, ignored. The band played beautifully. It did not matter. When it ended, the balcony clapped and the floor sat silent, and Delia saw Armstrong lower the horn and look out at all those folded arms with an expression she could not read. He played another. Same thing. Somewhere in the third row, a man laughed. One short, ugly bark meant to be heard, and a few around him chuckled along. Up in the balcony, a woman called out, "Play it, Satchmo!" and got shushed by the people beside her, as if wanting to enjoy the music was the thing you weren't allowed to do. Delia felt the whole room pulling in two directions at once, the floor going colder and harder with every number. Then, 4 rows back, Mr. Harlan Pryor stood up. He did it loudly, on purpose, scraping his chair so the whole section would hear it, and he began to make his way toward the aisle, toward Delia's post, with his hat already in his hand. He was leaving. He wanted everyone to see him leave. Half the floor was watching him instead of the stage, and Delia understood that if Mr. Pryor walked out, others would follow, and the whole night would come apart right there in front of her. That's when it happened. Armstrong stopped the band, held up one hand. The music died mid-phrase, and in the sudden quiet, the whole hall turned to look at the little man on the stage. He was looking straight at Mr. Pryor, who had frozen halfway to the aisle. "You leavin', friend?" Armstrong said, not angry, almost gentle. "That's all right. But let me play you one before you go. Just one. Then you go on home if you want to." And he did not play something fast. He did not try to win. He put the horn to his mouth and played soft and slow, the opening of a spiritual that every person in that room had learned as a child. "Nobody knows the trouble I've seen." He played it plain, no tricks, no showing off. Just the melody, aching and bare, the way a man hums something to himself when he thinks he's alone. Delia had been standing 3 feet from Mr. Pryor when the first phrase came out of that horn, and she watched it happen to his face. He stopped. The hat came down to his side. His jaw, which had been set hard for 3 weeks, for 400 signatures, for a lifetime, began to loosen. Armstrong let the melody bend and cry, and then, still playing, he began to walk. Down the little stairs at the front of the stage, up the center aisle, toward the man who had come to make him fail. 3,000 people did not make a sound. Delia said later you could hear the man's own breathing. Armstrong stopped an arm's length from Mr. Pryor and finished the spiritual right there in the aisle, one old man playing to another, close enough to touch. And when the last note faded, he lowered the trumpet and said, quiet enough that only the nearest rows caught it, though Delia 3 feet away caught every word. "We all know that trouble, don't we, friend? Every last one of us. I'm not here to take anything from you. I just came to play." Mr. Harlan Pryor, 49 years old, deacon, author of the petition, stood in the aisle of the municipal auditorium and wept. He did not hide it. He put out his hand, and Louis Armstrong shook it, and somewhere up in the balcony one person started to clap, and then it was 10, and then it was the whole room, the floor seats too, the money seats, the men who came to judge, all of them on their feet. And it did not stop for a very long time. They played for another hour and a half after that. Blueberry Hill, That's My Desire, and at the very end, When the Saints Go Marching In, and by then the room that had come to sit on its hands
was singing the words out loud, 3,000 strong, the balcony and the floor together, which in Chattanooga in March of 1957 was not a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. And Delia stood at her post with tears running down her own face, and she did not wipe them.
When it was over, the band packed up fast, the way touring bands do, and the crowd drifted out into the cold, still humming. Delia found herself near the edge of the stage as Armstrong came down the steps in his coat. He was tired. He looked every one of his years right then. But he saw the young usher standing there, and he stopped. "You cried, didn't you?" he said, and he smiled, that whole enormous smile. "That's all right. That's how you know it was real." He reached into his pocket, and Delia thought for one wild second he was going to hand her money. He didn't. He pulled out the white handkerchief, the one he'd carried in his left hand all night, damp now with the sweat of the whole performance, and he pressed it into her hand and closed her fingers over it. "Something to remember an old man by," he said. And then he was gone, out the stage door, into the bus, out of Chattanooga. Delia Boyd kept that handkerchief for the rest of her life. She married a man named Carl Whitfield in 1961 and outlived him. She raised 3 children and buried a 4th. She worked 41 years as a school teacher, 2 miles from the auditorium where it happened. And every September, on the first day of class, she would take a plain white handkerchief out of a cedar box and hold it up in front of a room of children who had no idea who Louis Armstrong was. And she would tell them the story of the night a whole city changed its mind. Mr. Harlan Pryor closed his hardware store in 1968. Before he did, Delia said, he kept a photograph behind the register. Not of his family, not of the store on opening day. A photograph of Louis Armstrong, clipped from a magazine, taped to the wall where he could see it while he made change. He never explained it to anyone who asked. He didn't have to. Delia knew. She told the story until she was 78, and she always ended it the same way. People wanted the moral to be about music, she said, or about a great man, or about a bad city that got better for one night. But that was not what she took from it. 3,000 people walked into that hall, certain of exactly who they were and what they believed. And one old man with a trumpet stood in front of them and refused, gently, without a single unkind word, to accept that certainty as the final answer. He did not argue with them. He did not shame them. He simply played them something true and trusted them to remember they were human. He could have played the fast songs and gotten his applause and left, Delia used to say. Anybody can win a friendly room. He walked into a room that had already decided against him, and he loved it anyway, out loud, in front of everybody, until it loved him back. She kept the handkerchief in the cedar box with her grandmother's scratched old record, the voice on the vinyl and the cloth from his own hand together. On the last afternoon she was strong enough to talk about it, a great-granddaughter asked her whether she'd been scared that night, standing so close when the man stood up to leave. Delia thought about it a long time. "I was," she said. "Everybody in that room was scared of something. That's why it was so cold in there." Then she smiled, the way you smile at something you've carried a long way. And then he made it warm. One song, one old man. warmest I ever felt in my life. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. It helps us keep these old memories alive. Have you ever sat in a room that walked in cold and left changed? A night when one voice turned a crowd of strangers into one? Tell us about it in the comments.